Every empire falls. That's what history says. Rome, Britain, the Soviets, even today, China and Russia are already cracking. And Europe isn't far behind. But what if one country refuses to collapse? What if the last superpower standing isn't just surviving, but thriving? In this video, we'll break down why America may be the only global power left standing by the end of this century, and how geography, tech, and sheer demographic force might make the US the final empire. Not because it's perfect, but because the rest are falling apart faster than anyone imagined. History feels like an endless, inescapable cycle, like we're all hamsters stuck on a wheel we can't control, even though we're supposed to be a lot smarter than hamsters. Empires rise, can't expand anymore, and collapse under their own weight as corruption and incompetence corrode their foundation from within. And now, a few people think the United States is on its way to join them. It just feels right. An overstretched military, a colossal debt, political paralysis at home that's now starting to prevent the government from even staying open? The shoe fits, especially when the US just hit a grim statistic. But maybe it doesn't fit. What if history is wrong this time? That's what everyone's hoping for. But to find out if it's just a fool's hope, we need to see when history is right. That's not too hard. Rome expanded rapidly and then couldn't afford to defend all that territory over centuries, especially when corruption and chaos tore it apart from within. The British Empire once covered a quarter of the globe. Then, it couldn't afford to keep its far-flung territories after the World Wars. Most recently, the Soviet Union shocked the world by falling to pieces almost overnight. And history didn't stop in 1991. We're seeing that pattern play out right now in the country that everybody said the 21st century would belong to, with a twist. Sometimes superpowers don't even need to suffer disaster on the battlefield. All their enemies need to do is wait for the clock to tick down. People were saying that the 21st century would be China's. It isn't hard to see why, with an economy that routinely grew by double digits every year. But the fertility rate wasn't growing with it. Just the opposite. Women tend to have fewer children when there's more wealth to go around. That's been the case as far back as ancient Rome, when the Emperor Augustus struggled to convince Roman women to have more babies. But you could at least say he tried. China's communist rulers did the opposite with the one-child policy. And lifting it didn't stop the trend. China's fertility rate fell to 1 child per woman in 2023. That's about the same or even lower than Japan. That's why China is aging faster than any major power. Right now, the median age is 40.1. But by 2049, the year it's supposed to be the world's strongest country if Xi Jinping has his way, it'll be 51.9. Good luck trying to compete with the US military with a recruitment pool that's grayer than the sky during a storm. But it gets worse, because geography's given China a bad hand to begin with. Go south to the Strait of Malacca. 80% of China's imported oil comes through this narrow channel. That's oh so easy to blockade. China might have 14,500 kilometers of coastline, but not all coastline is created equal. Since China's coast doesn't give it access to the world's oceans, it's of limited value for an aspiring superpower. China might have expanded at a breakneck pace, but now starting to show signs of strain as its economy slows. Debts pile up, and corruption plagues the ruling Communist Party, even as Xi was supposed to clean it up. Oh, and what's it supposed to do about all those ghost cities? Every day, China looks less like a superpower in waiting and more like a collapsing one, before it ever gets to where it was supposed to be. And China's so-called unlimited strategic partner is doing even worse. To discover Russia's problems and another case of imperial collapse, let's take another trip back in time. In 1808, Napoleon was at the height of his power. Then he decided to invade Spain. The Peninsular War was a slow and brutal bleed of French power. The people at the time called it Napoleon's ulcer. That's kind of like what China is suffering through right now. Fortunately, without the bloodshed. Then, in 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia. And that was an even worse disaster. 600,000 troops went triumphantly into the east, ready to beat the Russians on their own turf. You know how that turned out. Fewer than 100,000 made it out. At best, that was Napoleon's hemorrhage, and Vladimir Putin decided to follow the example. Here's a stat that will shock you. Start by thinking about it. How many wars has Russia been in? Probably a lot more than you can count, not because you can't do math, but because you won't be able to name them all. Russia's fought a lot more wars than the current one, and longer ones too. But now the war in Ukraine is the third deadliest in its history. Between 200,000 and 250,000 Russian men have died far from home, and over 1 million have become casualties. And the wars had knockoff effects. Even before the end of 2022, about 400,000 men left the country to avoid being drafted. These aren't just ordinary people either. They're among Russia's most productive. They're technology workers, businessmen, people with college degrees. Now they're trying to find employment overseas rather than enriching Russia's economy. These are people that won't be replaced, at least not anytime soon. Russia's fertility rate is a little better than China's. It's actually even gone up since the war started. In 2024 and 2025, it's been 1.83 children per woman. Xi is probably a little jealous of his best buddy, at least here. But that's still not enough to rejuvenate Russia from the losses it's suffering. Sometimes empires fall because they suffer catastrophic, irreversible military defeats. France used to be the dominant power on the European continent and had a sprawling colonial empire. But Britain steadily imposed its will as the 18th century unfolded. The War of the Spanish Succession started the trend. France's great Louis XIV was humbled. Then the 7 Years' War defeated France abroad. So by the time Napoleon came around, the balance of power had already changed. Britain was prepared to outlast and ultimately defeat him. And it did. And France was never the same again, at least not in the race between great powers. History rhymes. Russia's been clawing territory away from Ukraine, but at a cost it can't afford. In the big picture, this war is a defeat, no matter how much Putin tries to say otherwise. And you guessed it, corruption at home led to a lot of those disasters. Russian troops have been hard-pressed even to get body armor because officers saw black market sales as a way to make a quick buck. A quick victory over Ukraine was supposed to rejuvenate Russia from its post-Soviet fall. Instead of making it a superpower again, it's accelerated Russia's irrelevance. There's another big irony about the war in Ukraine. For centuries, Russia has expanded its borders to prevent an invasion. In the modern world, those enemies have been in the West, in Europe. The Soviet Union's end in 1981 meant that Russia's borders were wide open to an attack, all thanks to the European plain that stretched from the Pyrenees to the Urals, getting wider the further east it goes. The invasion of Ukraine was supposed to narrow that gap a little bit, just not as little as it's actually done. But if Putin thought harder about it, he wouldn't have needed to go with such a costly security strategy, because Europe is weaker now than it's been at any point since the 15th century. Europe got really rich and powerful as it explored the world and planted colonies in far-off lands. The British Empire alone controlled a quarter of the world's landmass. Almost the entire continents of Africa and Asia were under the control of one European power or another by the early 20th century. But the World War shattered all of that. Europe was left militarily and financially decimated, deep in debt to the former colony called the United States. For a while, Europe tried to stay in the mix. Countries like Britain and France held on to some of their colonies for a while, but it was useless. They just couldn't afford to keep them. Europe did eventually recover from the wars, but too late to keep its place as the world's center. In 2024, Europe made up only 24.7% of the world's GDP. That's a fair share, but it's far behind North America's 30.9% and Asia's 36.4%. What was once the center of the world economy is increasingly a secondary player. And how's this for another stat that proves it? In 2008, the United States and European Union had economies that were about equal in size. Actually, the EU was slightly in the lead, with a GDP 110% the size of the US. Then came the Great Recession, and one bounced back far better than the other. Between 2008 and 2023, the EU's economy grew by 13.5%, from 16.37 trillion to 18.59 trillion. The US? It grew by 87%, from 14.77 to 27.72 trillion. And the gap is even worse when you look at the GDP per capita. In 2008, Europe's GDP per capita was 76.5% of America's level. In 2023, it was 50%. What happened? Well, Brexit did. But that's not the only thing. It's hard to be productive when your workforce is getting old, fast. It's not quite as bad as China, but still pretty bad. In 2023, the EU's total fertility rate was 1.38 children per woman. That's way below the replacement, and it gets worse when you take a tour of Europe and look at how fast the gray hairs are multiplying in its biggest economies. France is doing comparatively okay at a rate of 1.66. Poland, 1.16. Spain, 1.12. Italy, 1.20. And the biggest of all, Germany, is stuck at 1.39. That means only one thing. The EU's current median age of 44.7 is going to shoot up faster than the rockets Americans are used to seeing on the 4th of July. By 2050, over half the people in Europe will be pushing 50. That means fewer workers, less tax revenue, and overburdened healthcare systems. Europe tried to solve the problem with immigration, but despite record levels in the last 10 years, the continent's median age still went up by 2.2 years between 2014 and 2024. Europe also just isn't all that good at integrating immigrants, so it's also brought a host of other issues. That's a whole different can of worms, but Brexit was just one of the consequences. Check out our recent video about the tense situation in Britain if you want to find out more. And please consider subscribing to the channel while you're at it. It really helps us to go through the problems you won't see reported on your nightly news broadcast. Anyway, Europe's graying population means it has the same problems China has. How's it supposed to recruit soldiers when half the population is already heading for retirement? It'll have a real problem reversing decades of lackluster military readiness. Putin's so-called special military operation in Ukraine jolted Europe into finally trying to meet NATO's 2% benchmark for defense spending. But in 2024, the EU's defense expenditures were still only a collective 1.9%. It's progress, but Europe still depends on the United States for its security, and that's probably not going to change for a long time. Could be a bad situation if the United States is supposed to fall from superpower status. But people don't talk about American exceptionalism for nothing. Head across the Atlantic and you'll notice something. It's a wide ocean, and it's the first secret to American exceptionalism. The United States has an even wider ocean to the west, and that's the second secret. The closest example would be Britain at the height of its power, where it had the English Channel to guard against invasion and the Royal Navy to rule the waves. It worked really well, but it fell short once air power became a thing in the world wars. But even in this age of air power, a raid on the United States is unthinkable. It takes a lot of fuel to cross an ocean, and no one else has the refueling tankers to get their aircraft across those oceans in numbers. In 2024, the United States had 606 refueling tankers, 75% of the world's total. Russia, third in the world with 19. China didn't even make the top 5. Sure, the oceans don't protect the United States as well from intercontinental ballistic missiles. Russia and China have ICBMs that can hit the contiguous United States, but they'd have to think really hard about it since they'd get hit back. The geographical advantage remains. Nowhere in history has a great power been so well protected from rivals by its position. And the United States? It can use its military against any target in the world within a day, all without risking the use of its ICBMs. That's because America has a sprawling network of allies and partners. NATO is just the tip of the iceberg. The United States has at least 128 bases across 49 countries around the world. Over 170,000 troops are deployed overseas at any given time. It's a vast logistical forward operating network, and it gives the United States the ultimate advantage. It can hit at its enemies, while its enemies can't cross the oceans to hit it. We'll put it bluntly, No other superpower ever had such a cheat code. But you don't have to go overseas to find the only cheat code in the game of empires. Just look at a chart of the United States compared to the places people used to say could become a superpower. China, Russia, Europe, you know their demographic problems now. Across the oceans, the United States is the only major power whose population is still growing. By 2050, the median age in America will be 41.9. Not fantastic, but far better than China's 51.9. Ironically, the American fertility rate hit a record low of 1.59 in 2024. That's lower than Russia's and not much better than Germany's. But the United States sees about 1 million new legal immigrants arrive every year. And that's helping to keep the population pyramid from becoming the upside-down basket case it's becoming in China. That means more productivity, more soldiers, and less of a national income spent on pensions and health care. Those immigrants aren't the ones sneaking over the southern border. The ones that come in legally are often there to go to America's world-class universities, which prepare them to contribute to the national economy. Just look at the trend. In 2000, only 16.4% of America's STEM workforce was foreign-born. In 2019, it was 23.1%. That's because the United States is still the place to be to start a business or a family. Its tech sector leads the world despite increased competition from China. True, monitors like the Insect Group think that China's AI models are only a few months behind America's. And China produces half the world's AI researchers, compared to 18% from the United States. But it's all about the money, and America can make it rain. America still dwarfs China in private AI investment, $67.2 billion in 2023, compared to its rival of $7.8 billion. That's because of America's second secret weapon. It has a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship that China can't match. Because in China, especially Xi Jinping's China, everything has to conform to the glories of socialism. And China isn't exactly a place that's set to attract the world's top talent. America can combine immigration and innovation to produce the best results in ways its rivals can't. It's better at integration than Europe is. That's part of why Europe is growing regulations more than it's growing its economy. America's success isn't just luck. It's because of its constitutional architecture. As others falter, it only becomes more obvious. But it's not all smooth sailing for the United States. There's no guarantee it'll stay on top. Historically high immigration levels are doing more than growing its population. It's growing housing costs too, and helping to polarize America's politics. Its democratic institutions continue to function, but increasingly on shaky ground. Case in point, the federal government is having a hard time even staying open. Between 1980 and 1996, there were 6 government shutdowns lasting a combined 30 days. Between 2013 and 2025, there were 4 and they're lasting longer, a combined 67 days, and counting as of October 13th. And the shutdowns are a sign. Here's that statistic we talked about at the beginning. Since the United States is having trouble paying its bills, it's staring off a precipice it doesn't want to look down on. In 2024, the United States spent more on debt service than on defense, $1.01 trillion compared to $907.7 billion. It's been called the Ferguson limit, after the economic historian Niall Ferguson. Want to know why superpowers collapse? According to him, this is a sure-shot mark. Any great power that spends more on debt service than on defense will not stay great very long. True of Habsburg Spain, true of ancient regime France, true of the Ottoman Empire, true of the British Empire. This law is about to be put to the test by the U.S. beginning this very year. And with America's 2 political parties seemingly more eager to argue about transgender bathrooms than address issues like this, it's better for fundraising. You might be forgiven for thinking the country is already in decline. But there's one more secret weapon. The U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency. Investors want to go into the U.S. economy because for all the reasons we've gone over, it's still the surest thing. That was something those other superpowers didn't have, and it's something that China doesn't have now. That means that for all its problems, the United States can still confidently plan to return people to the moon by 2028. while China is more limited on planning what to do with all its ghost cities. But do you think America is truly exceptional? Or will its power decline along with its rivals and every other superpower before it? Don't forget to let us know in the comments.